One September day in 2004, a woman made a chilling discovery in her friend's home. A man was found hanging in her garage, but that was only the start of the horrors that lay inside. Carl Eric Brandt, who went by the name Charlie, was born on February 23, 1957, to parents Herbert and Ilse Brandt. His parents were both German immigrants. The pair initially moved to Texas before settling in Connecticut. Herbert was a manual labourer who showed enough knowledge and dedication to move his way up to being a project engineer for the company. This new position led to the Brandt family moving to a few different states before ending up in Indiana. The frequent moves meant that Charlie and his older sister, Angela, often had their lives upended. While Angela handled these moves, they were more difficult for young Charlie. He fared well with his grades, but his teachers described Charlie as a shy boy who found it difficult to fit in with his peers. The move to Fort Wayne, Indiana, came in September 1968, when Charlie was 11 years old. Things seemed normal for the family. Herbert was earning a comfortable enough wage that allowed them to often vacation in Florida, and Charlie and his father bonded over hunting for small game out in the rural areas of Fort Wayne. But it was clear from a young age that there was something very wrong with Charlie after the disturbing events that unfolded one January night in 1971. It was a cold winter evening on January 3rd, 1971. Charlie and Angela had been put to bed, and Herbert was shaving in his bathroom while Ilse was in the bath. There was a new family member on the way, as Ilse was 8 months pregnant at the time. Suddenly, without warning, 13-year-old Charlie walked into the bathroom armed with his father's handgun. He then raised his arm and shot his father in the back at point-blank range. After his father collapsed, Charlie turned to his mother and fired multiple rounds at her. Ilse died instantly, but Herbert survived the bizarre attack. After shooting his mum and dad, Charlie wasn't yet done. He then walked into Angela's room and attempted to shoot her. Her saving grace was that the gun would not fire, or she too may have died that night. Angela got up and tried to wrestle the gun away from her brother while trying to calm the situation. She repeatedly promised him she would help figure this all out. After some time, Angela got Charlie to go and fetch blankets for their sisters, who were still infants at the time, before she ran to a neighbour's house for help. Charlie followed Angela and knocked on a different neighbour's home. "I just shot my mum and dad," he said. When Herbert later recovered and was interviewed by police, he confirmed it had been Charlie who shot him and his wife. Due to his age, there was no possibility of Charlie Brandt being sentenced to any jail time for the murder and attempted murder of his mother and father. However, he was extensively interviewed by multiple psychiatrists who wanted to figure out what had set Charlie off. When Angela was interviewed, she described Charlie's behaviour as trance-like. When he entered her room and raised the gun at her, it was almost as if Charlie wasn't there in the moment. After the struggle, he seemed to snap back into reality. Charlie maintained that he could not remember his actions that night, but he did admit to police that he snapped. "Everything sort of just snapped in my mind," he said. "I felt like I never felt before." Some of his statements led investigators to believe something had been going on at school that affected Charlie, but that wouldn't explain why he chose to take it out on his parents. There was also mention of an incident that took place in late December, when he was out hunting with his dad while they were on vacation in Florida. Charlie claimed Herbert had shot their dog, but added no further context to what had happened. None of the psychiatrists who evaluated Charlie were able to determine what triggered him to shoot his parents. He spent a year in a psychiatric hospital following the incident before being released back into the custody of his family when he was 14 years old. Neither Herbert nor Angela spoke about what happened that day. Charlie's younger sisters even believed for years that their mother died in a car crash. Once Charlie was out of the psychiatric hospital, the family moved to Ormond Beach, Florida, likely to distance themselves from Charlie's past. Herbert remarried and took his 2 youngest daughters back to Indiana. Charlie stayed back in Florida with Angela and moved in with their grandparents. Charlie graduated high school before going to college and getting a degree in electronics. From there, Charlie got a job as a radar specialist for Ford Aerospace. 2 years later, Charlie got married to Teresa Helfrich, who went by the name Terry. He did not invite any of his family to the wedding, possibly because Angela, who herself was married, advised Charlie to come clean to Terry about his past. Charlie never did. In 1989, Charlie and Terry moved to Big Pine Key in the idyllic Florida Keys, where they lived in a house right on the beach. Terry and Charlie seemed to make a great couple. He was a bit odd, or eccentric, as her family referred to him, but that meshed well with Terry's happy-go-lucky nature. Her friends described her as a wonderful, kind individual who didn't get flustered easily. They also all noted that Charlie seemed to deeply love Terry. Their marriage was smooth, with few arguments. Neither of them ever really saw the other get angry, and Terry certainly never mentioned any worrying signs in Charlie. In September 2004, Hurricane Ivan was hurtling towards the United States, and Charlie and Terry fell in one of the areas where evacuation had been strongly recommended. On September 2nd, they packed up their most valuable possessions, tried to secure the house as much as they could, and set off for the home of Michelle Lynn Jones, their niece, who was the daughter of Terry's sister. Michelle was a successful TV executive at the Golf Channel and lived in Orlando, where Hurricane Ivan wasn't predicted to affect. Michelle was close with her mother, Mary Lou, and the pair remained in frequent contact. This was no different while Charlie and Terry were visiting. Lisa Emmons, a close friend of Michelle, was supposed to come over and visit her on September 13th, but Michelle asked that they reschedule, as the atmosphere in the home wasn't great. Charlie and Terry had gotten into an argument the night before, so they would need some time to cool off. However, that visit between Michelle and Lisa never came. On the evening of September 13th, none of Michelle's friends or her mum could get in contact with her. This immediately struck them as odd. Still, no one wanted to worry too much. Maybe Michelle was busy or had an issue with her phone. By September 15th, Michelle had still not been in contact with anyone. This sparked one of her friends, Debbie Knight, to drive over to Michelle's home and check that everything was okay with her. As she pulled up, Debbie had Michelle's mum on the line. First, she approached the front door, only to find it was locked. Then, Debbie went to try and get through the garage. This time, it was open. As she pulled up the sliding door, Debbie was greeted by a horrifying scene. A man was hanging from the rafters after committing suicide using tied-up bedsheets. That man was Charlie Brandt, but worse was yet to come. Debbie rushed outside and notified the police. Officers were soon on the scene, and they went into the rest of the house to try and locate Michelle and Terry. Terry was found lying on the couch. She had been stabbed 7 times in the chest with a knife from the kitchen. Michelle had been decapitated, with her head being placed next to her body. Her organs had also been removed and left beside her head. It was a scene that would forever be scarred into the minds of these investigators, who now had to figure out what on earth had happened here. Those who knew Terry and Charlie as a couple couldn't fathom what had taken place in Michelle's home. Melanie Fetcher, one of Terry's best friends, even remarked, "If my husband could love me 1/3 the amount that Charlie loved Terry, I'd be the luckiest woman in the whole world." Rob Hemmert was the lead investigator on the case. In the days following the murders, Charlie and Terry's family were due to attend a briefing. One member who couldn't bring herself to go inside was Charlie's older sister, Angela. Instead, she approached Rob Hemmert and said she had something to tell him. That is when the story that had haunted the Brandts for over 30 years finally came to light.
I haven't told this story. I can't remember when.
This is Investigator Rob Hemmert with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. The person being interviewed is Angela, and the last name is Brandt. That's right.
Okay, I won't cry.
All right.
It was January 3rd, 1971.
Charlie was 13?
Yes.
And Angela, you were how old? 15. Tell me again what took place and what was going on.
9:10 p.m.
Okay.
We had just gotten a color TV.
Right.
So we were all sitting around watching the FBI, Efron Zimbalist Jr. and all that.
Okay.
The FBI was over. We went upstairs. I went and got in bed to read my book like I always did before I went to sleep.
Okay.
My mom ran a bath and read Time magazine. My dad was shaving.
Okay. So you're in your bed reading, and what happens next?
I heard loud noises, which I perceived to be firecrackers.
Okay.
For the simple reason, not that that makes any sense.
That's all right.
But,
Sure.
what other loud noise is there?
Popping.
Yeah, just a really loud noise, and I just, like I said, I just thought it was firecrackers. So I started pulling the covers back to see why on earth, there was all this noise going on. But then I heard my father yell, Charlie, don't, or Charlie, stop. And my mom was just screaming, and the last thing I ever heard my mom say was, Angela, call the police.
When the Brandts' Big Pine Key home was searched, investigators found Charlie had regularly searched for autopsy photos online, as well as snuff films. Much of the content featured extreme violence towards women, and Charlie also had somewhat of an obsession with surgeries and anatomy. There was no doubt that Charlie had killed Terry and Michelle, but the nature in which he did so left the authorities thinking he must have killed before. They knew he travelled frequently for his job, so they began looking for unsolved murders that bore some of the same features as the murders in Orlando. Eventually, they found one such unsolved murder. On July 16, 1989, 38-year-old Sherry Parisot's body was found floating in the waters of Big Pine Key. It was clear this was no accidental drowning. Sherry's throat had been slashed and her body mutilated. Sherry's heart had even been removed from her chest. It was clear a true monster was responsible for her death. Terry and Charlie lived less than 1,000 feet from where Sherry was found, and Charlie happened to match a sketch that authorities had created of a man spotted crossing US Route 1, near to where Sherry's body had been disposed of. It was only after Terry herself was killed that the police investigating the Orlando case found out that she suspected her husband was responsible for Sherry's death. On the night Sherry was murdered, Charlie arrived back home with obvious blood on his shirt, though he claimed it was fish blood. In May 2006, Sherry Parisot's case was finally closed. They were confident that Charlie Brandt had been responsible for her murder. Records from Charlie's brief stay in the psychiatric hospital might help to understand his past, but the Brandt family refuses to allow the state to release them. I'd love to see the medical records and find out what type of treatment he had, if any. And how they handled him, says Hemmert. What triggered him back in '71 to kill his mother? What actually was the breaking point for him? Angela said that she was glad that Charlie had committed suicide, and now she could sleep at night. For 20-some years, Angela would not allow the air conditioner to run or the windows to be open in her home because she was afraid Charlie would come back to kill her. Charlie is considered to be an invisible criminal whose total number of victims is unlikely ever to be brought to light. We hope to shed light on the victims' stories. It is important to remember that behind every tragic story are real people, real lives, and real pain. These stories remind us of the fragility of human existence and the importance of empathy and understanding in our society. We honour the memory of those lost and affected by this tragedy,